He never used her name, not once in 11 months. Not when she handed him the revised floor plans at 7 in the morning. Not when she stayed past midnight to fix the lighting calculations he had rejected without explanation. Not when she crossed a room full of people to place the exact coffee he took. Black, no sugar, too hot for anyone else to drink, directly beside his hand without being asked. He called her the drafting girl, or nothing at all. Norah Bennett had made peace with that. Quiet peace, the kind you build slowly out of necessity, the way people in cold places learn to stop complaining about the wind. She was 26, new to Montreal, new to the industry, and grateful enough for the work that she had trained herself not to want more than what the work gave her: a salary, a portfolio, the private satisfaction of fixing things before anyone else noticed they were broken. What she had not trained herself against was Vincent Rohr himself. That had been the mistake, the one she had not seen coming until it was already too late to protect herself from it. Vincent Rohr was 41 years old and the kind of man Montreal moved around rather than through. His firm, Rohr Meridian Group, held contracts across the city that touched everything from waterfront development to the kind of private residential work that never appeared in architectural journals because the clients preferred their names attached to nothing. Officially, he was a developer. Unofficially, he was a roomer. People did not repeat at restaurants with open floor plans and walls thin enough to carry sound. Norah had heard enough in stairwells and supply rooms to know where to stop listening. What she knew from 11 months of proximity was this: Vincent Rohr walked into every room as though it had already agreed to his terms. He did not raise his voice, he did not need to. His stillness did the work for him. He was tall enough to make a boardroom feel smaller. His suits were the color of winter mornings, charcoal, slate, the deep blue-gray of ice before it cracks. His hands never fidgeted. His eyes were the kind of steady that made people look away first. He frightened people. He did not appear to find that interesting. Norah had made a different study of him, not deliberate, nothing she had chosen. It had simply accumulated the way water finds its level without asking permission. She knew the pause he took before entering a client meeting. One breath, one adjustment of his cuff, then through the door as if he had already decided the outcome before sitting down. She knew the sound of his footsteps in the hall, before the floor even registered he had arrived. She knew that he kept a glass of water on the left side of his desk, and almost never touched it, and that when a deal was going wrong he read the same page of the contract twice without turning it. She also knew the precise moment she had fallen in love with him, which was information she had shared with no one and intended to take quietly to her grave. It had been February, 2 months after she started, a structural review meeting that had gone sideways, voices raised behind glass, a junior engineer close to tears in the corridor. Norah had stepped out of the filing room to find the young man pressing both palms against the wall, trying to steady his breathing in the way people did when they thought no one was watching. Vincent Rohr had come around the corner, at that same moment, tablet in hand, moving fast with 2 associates behind him. He had stopped, no announcement, no performance. He handed the tablet to one of the men without looking at him, and walked to the engineer and said something low enough that Norah, from 10 feet away, could not make out the words, but she saw the young man's shoulders release. She saw him nod. She saw Vincent gesture once toward the boardroom and say something to the associates, who disappeared immediately. He had not waited to be thanked. He had already moved on, down the corridor toward the elevators, as if compassion was a thing he practiced without needing an audience for it. Norah had stood in the hallway with a stack of revised drawings in her hands and felt something crack open in her chest that she had been trying to press shut ever since. After that, she noticed too much. She noticed that he never used charm as a substitute for attention, that he listened in meetings longer than powerful men were supposed to, that there was a particular loneliness in him she could see sometimes in the 5 seconds before he noticed anyone else was watching. She noticed that he remembered the name of every contractor on a site but introduced himself to no one by his first name. She had no business seeing any of it, but she did, and somewhere between the February hallway and a Tuesday in November, when she overheard him tell a client that the drafting work on the East Residential was the best his firm had produced in 3 years. Without knowing she was standing on the other side of the partition, she made the particular mistake of feeling something permanent about a man who did not know her name. At 7:45 on a Wednesday in January, Norah arrived on the 14th floor with the revised site submissions tucked under one arm and her coat still damp from the street. The wind off the St. Lawrence had been vicious that morning. She had walked fast with her head down, The way you did in Montreal in winter when the cold had opinions. She set her things down at her workstation outside the senior partner's corridor and turned on her desk lamp. The floor was still mostly quiet, the good hour she called it privately, before the noise. 20 minutes later, a voice cut across the stillness. Tell me that's fresh, because otherwise today starts badly and I'd rather it didn't. Norah looked up. Jonah Luke stood at the edge of her desk with 2 cups from the cafe downstairs, holding one out with an expression that suggested he already knew the answer but was enjoying the question. He was tall, broad-shouldered, sandy-haired in the way of men who grew up near water. He worked in client relations on the floor below and had, over the past few weeks, developed a habit of appearing upstairs with coffee and no particularly convincing professional reason for being there. He was 30, easy with people, in the way Norah never quite managed to be, and she liked him in the uncomplicated way. You liked someone who asked nothing difficult of you. She looked at the cup. Where did you even find a cafe open at this hour? I have resources. He set it carefully beside her keyboard. Oat milk, 1 sugar, unless your orders changed on me. You remember that? Jonah shrugged with great dignity. I pay attention. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Not a polite one, a real one, low and unguarded, the kind she had not produced at work in longer than she wanted to admit. It had been a hard week. The Beaumont project had stalled. Her landlord had sent a 3rd notice about the heating unit she had already reported twice, and she had spent Sunday evening on the phone with her mother, pretending things were going better than they were. Jonah's straightforward kindness cut through all of it like light under a closed door. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know. That's what makes it generous. She shook her head and lifted the cup. You're absurd. Only before 9. After that I become quite serious. He glanced toward the closed door at the end of the corridor. How's the 14th today? Anyone throwing furniture yet? Norah lowered her voice on instinct. It's early, right, so still possible. She tried not to smile and failed and looked down at the cup to hide it. He noticed anyway. There it is, he said quietly. There what is? You've been staring at drawings for 3 days straight. You forget you're allowed to look like a person sometimes. Norah lifted her eyes. His expression was warm, direct, without the careful calibration of someone managing an impression. It made her both grateful and slightly uneasy in the way that simple things sometimes did when you had spent too long among complicated ones. I'm a person, she said. Debitable. You were here at 6:30 yesterday. I checked the entry log. That's unsettling. It's called concern. It comes in different shapes. She laughed again, properly this time, the sound rising before she could measure it, bright and honest and carrying further down the corridor than she intended. From inside the office at the end of the hall, Vincent Rohr looked up from the contract on his desk. He did not know what stopped him at first. He had been 3/4 through a clause about material delivery timelines, a tedious section he had read 4 times already and would read again before signing. The work was consuming in the way he preferred. No room for anything else. Then the sound reached him. He did not move for a moment, just sat still with the pen in his hand and listened to what the building had produced. A laugh, warm, unreserved, the kind that arrived without asking permission. Too alive for the 14th floor, too unguarded for an office that ran mostly on precision and controlled exchanges. He set the pen down without meaning to and walked to the door. The corridor outside was ordinary. Filing cabinets, recessed lighting, the long row of workstations near the window, and at the one outside his door, the drafting girl, Norah. Her name was Norah. He knew that he had simply never used it, standing with her head tipped back and a coffee cup in one hand, laughing at something the man from client relations had said. The man was leaning against her desk with the ease of someone who thought he had already won whatever he had shown up to win. Close enough to suggest familiarity, close enough to suggest the kind of casual access that takes time to earn. Something turned hard and specific in Vincent's chest before he had produced a name for it. He stood in the doorway. The floor noticed before she did. There was a particular silence that gathered whenever Vincent Rohr appeared in a space unannounced. It moved through the room like a change in air pressure. Norah felt it first as a shift in Jonah's expression. Then she turned. Vincent stood at the end of the corridor with one hand in his coat pocket, looking at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. Every nerve in her body registered the difference at once. Jonah straightened without meaning to. Several people at adjacent desks suddenly found urgent things to look at on their screens. Vincent's voice came down the corridor without effort or volume. Who is that? It was not a question, technically. His deputy, Garrett, appeared from the interior office. Jonah Luke, client relations, floor below. Why is he up here? Garrett kept his face professionally neutral. I can find out. Do that. Jonah received the message without it being delivered directly to him, which was its own kind of message. He glanced at Norah. Something complicated moved through his expression. Confusion first, then a dawning irritation, then something more careful behind that. Okay, he said, mostly to himself. He looked at Norah. I'll see you later. Before she could answer, Vincent's voice came again. Bennett, her last name. She had never heard him use it. Her stomach made a sound decision that the rest of her body failed to keep up with. She picked up her notebook from pure reflex, though she could not have explained why, and crossed the corridor toward him. Passing Vincent in a doorway felt like stepping past a source of heat you had not expected. She caught cedar and cold morning air still on his coat. Felt his attention settle on her like weight. The door closed behind her with a soft sound that echoed more than it should have. His office was warmer than the corridor. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the river, the gray white of a January morning pressing flat against the glass. A drafting table occupied one wall, unused today, clean as a thought not yet had. His main desk held a laptop, a glass of water on the left, 3 folders stacked with geometric precision. Nothing accidental. Norah stood until it became clear he was not going to tell her to sit. He had removed his coat and walked to the windows, his back to her for a moment, hands clasped behind him. Then he turned. You were distracted this morning. His voice was quiet. That made it worse. I have the updated Beaumont submissions if you need them. That's not what I asked about. Heat climbed into her face. Then I'm not sure what you're asking. His gaze moved to the coffee cup she was still holding, then back to her. You were laughing. The statement landed with such odd weight that she almost forgot to be careful. I'm sorry, that is not an apology I'm asking for. Norah held still. He came around the desk now. Not close enough to change the register of the conversation, but close enough that the distance between them was no longer simply professional. I have walked past that desk for 11 months, he said. You hand me drawings. You correct errors before I see them. You answer in complete sentences and leave no loose ends. A pause. In all of that time, I have never heard you sound like that, she managed. Like what? Like you were somewhere you wanted to be. The words landed between them with surprising force. Norah tried for composure and found something more honest by accident. Maybe no one gave me a reason. Something moved through his expression, quick and guarded, but there. And he did. He was being kind. That, Vincent said, is exactly the problem. She stared at him. With respect, I don't understand why that's a problem at all. His jaw tightened once. Because the first time I actually see you, he said, each word measured and deliberate, you're looking at someone else like he matters. The room seemed to reduce itself around that sentence. Every surface, every gray winter angle of the light, every precise detail of the space pulled tight and close. She should have looked away, she didn't. Why would that matter to you? For a moment he said nothing. She watched something move through his face, something that looked like a truth arriving ahead of his permission. When he answered, his voice was lower. Because now I can't stop seeing you. Norah's breath caught so sharply it hurt. He exhaled once through his nose, almost annoyed at himself. You may go. The dismissal came like a door closing on a room that had just changed its dimensions entirely. She stood there a full second, unable to determine whether any of what had happened was real. Then his gaze dropped to the notebook in her hands, and the moment cracked enough for embarrassment to come flooding in behind it. Yes, she said softly. Of course. She turned before he could see how badly her hands were shaking. Out in the corridor, no one looked at her directly. They didn't need to. The silence had changed shape and they could all feel it. Norah sat back at her desk with the careful precision of a woman holding herself together by the specific act of not stopping. She opened the nearest folder and stared at a drawing she could not read. An hour later, Vincent passed her desk on his way to a client call. Expression entirely composed, nothing readable in it, but at the end of her desk he stopped. Her pulse moved into her throat. He looked down at the stack of Beaumont submissions in front of her. Move the structural review to Thursday. Moreau will need extra time on the site assessment. Her voice only almost failed. Of course. Then he looked at her. Not at the papers, at her one held beat. Then he kept walking. The weight of it stayed with her through the rest of the afternoon. By noon she had decided she was reading things that weren't there. By 3 she had replayed the conversation enough times to doubt the accuracy of her own memory. By 5 she simply sat with the unnerving fact that she felt more alive than she had in months, and hated herself mildly for it. She left the building as the sky was going the dark blue that came before snow, took St. Denis toward the metro, coat buttoned to her throat, the cold earning every exposed inch of skin. The city moved around her in its usual frantic evening way. Shop lights blurring through the wet, and voices from a cafe door swinging open and shut. She should have felt ordinary again among strangers. She did not. His voice followed her all the way home. Her apartment in Rosemont was small in the particular way that Montreal rentals were small, which is to say charming in the summer and honest in January. The radiator in the bedroom still clicked 4 times before producing heat. One kitchen window had a gap in the seal that she'd stuffed with a folded tea towel. The building smelled of her neighbor's cooking, and she had learned to find it comforting. That night it felt too small for the size of what had happened in that office. She dropped her keys, set her bag on the counter, stood in the dark without reaching for the light. The first time I actually see you, you're looking at someone else like he matters. She pressed her fingers to her mouth as if the words had left a mark there. It was absurd. It was impossible. He was her employer, and not the ordinary kind. A man whose reputation moved through professional circles in ways that suggested the professional side was only the portion that had agreed to be seen. A man who belonged to a different world even when he was standing 3 feet away with winter still in his coat. She didn't sleep much. When she did, she dreamed of corridor light and gray windows and the specific feeling of being looked at after a very long time of being looked through. The next morning she arrived to find her workstation gone. Not moved. Gone. The desk, the lamp, her monitor, the small print of Rue Sainte Catherine she'd pinned beside the window for color, all of it. The carpet showed a clean rectangle where the desk had been. The office manager came toward her with the expression of someone who would rather be having a different morning. Miss Bennett, Mr. Rohr has made a change to the workspace arrangement. Norah looked at the empty floor. To what arrangement? The man gestured, with visible reluctance, toward the interior office. Through the glass she could see it. A second desk, positioned to the right of Vincent's, angled so that lifting his eyes from work would bring her directly into view. Her monitor, the St. Catherine print already pinned to the partition beside it. Someone had even moved her coffee mug. He'd like you to come in as soon as you arrived, the manager said. Of course he would. Norah adjusted the strap of her bag and crossed the floor with a composure she did not entirely feel. She knocked once. His voice came through the door in the same register he used for quarterly reviews. Come in. The room was warmer than the corridor as always. He was at his desk, jacket on, reading something on a tablet as if the reorganization of her entire working life had occupied approximately the same category of decision as rescheduling a lunch. He looked up. Good morning, Norah. Her first name. She had to work, not to show what that did. She looked at the desk. You moved my workspace. Yes, why? He set the tablet down. Because I wanted you in here. That's not a reason. It is to me. Norah set her bag on the new desk without sitting. People are already noticing. They'll manage. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. His voice stayed even. You're worried about what they'll say, aren't you? He gave the smallest inclination of his head. They're already saying it. She waited for something that acknowledged this as extraordinary, something that suggested even a brief consideration of caution. It did not come. You don't care, she said. His gaze didn't move from hers. No. Norah looked at him with what she hoped was professional incredulity. Then he said, in the same tone he might use to approve a revised budget, I would prefer they know. The flush reached her face before she could stop it. Vincent, his name, out of her mouth before she had thought it through. Something dark and satisfied crossed his expression. Sit down, Norah. Her knees were less reliable than she would have liked them to be, but she sat. The chair was new enough to still feel unfamiliar. Her old workstation had given her distance, the small, safe geography of being outside his sight line. This was different. 6 feet away, she could see the particular blue of his eyes, the fine scar along his left hand from something she had never asked about, the shadow under his eyes that said he had not slept enough. She had studied him for 11 months in fragments. This was being placed directly in the current of him. He returned to the tablet as if giving her a moment. You'll handle all communication that comes through my office directly. Nothing reaches me without going through you first. Legal, acquisitions, external clients. If anyone has a difficulty with that, they can bring it to me. Norah. You planned this, yes. When? His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Yesterday, she thought of the conversation, of standing in this room with her notebook in both hands. while he said something that had turned her understanding of the past 11 months over entirely. She had gone home and lain awake, telling herself she had imagined half of it. Apparently she had underestimated. "You're acting as if this is a normal thing to do," she said. "For me it is. I had a desk outside yesterday. You have one inside today. That's not an explanation." He looked at her steadily. "It's a decision. You make it sound like those are the same. In my experience, they usually are." She could not decide whether to be furious or undone by that. Some unhelpful part of her was tending toward the latter. He was impossible, precise and unyielding and completely uninterested in explaining himself. And sitting 6 feet from him with the river pale and flat through the windows behind his shoulders, she felt something in her chest she had no practice managing. His phone rang. He answered in French, the particular Quebecois cadence she recognized from client calls. Then something shifted and it became a different French, lower, older, clipped around the edges in ways that didn't belong in a boardroom conversation. She caught half the words, understood the tone fully: control, pressure disguised as pleasantry, a warning wrapped in impeccable politeness. By the time he finished, he was once again the composed man behind the immaculate desk. He looked up and found her watching him. "What?" he said. "Nothing." Too quickly, one dark brow lifted. "You were staring." The heat in her face was an embarrassment. "So were you. Yesterday." A silence followed that did not feel empty. Then he said, "Yes, I was." A knock on the glass door broke it. A junior associate stepped in, stopped visibly when she saw Norah at the interior desk, and recovered in the way people practiced when they worked for Vincent Rohr. "The Moreau site assessment, Mr. Rohr." "Leave it with Norah." The associate crossed the room and set the folder on Norah's desk with careful neutrality. Left in under 10 seconds. Norah looked at the folder, then at Vincent. "You did that deliberately." "Yes. You enjoy making things complicated. I'm making things clear. That's nearly the opposite." She opened the folder mostly to have somewhere to put her hands. They worked in the same room for the next hour and a half, her scheduling, rerouting communications, learning the geography of a position that was the same as her old one and entirely different. Him, contracts, site reviews, one call in English that ended with a number she was not supposed to hear. She looked up twice and caught him looking at her. The first time he made no attempt to pretend otherwise. The second time neither did she. By late morning Jonah appeared at the glass door. He looked at Norah, then at the interior arrangement, then at Vincent with the expression of someone completing an equation they would rather. The answer had come out differently. Vincent did not look up from the document he was reading. "Mr. Luke." Jonah came to a stop. "I came to see if Norah needed anything. She doesn't." Jonah's jaw tightened. He looked at Norah instead. "You good?" She found his eyes. He had been the first person on the 14th floor to bring her coffee. The first person to notice she laughed too rarely. He deserved honesty, even if she could not give him all of it. "I'm okay," she said. "You don't need to worry." Something shifted in his expression. He looked once at Vincent. Whatever he saw there confirmed something he had already half understood. "Right." He picked up the cup he'd carried in and set it on the corner of her new desk. "I'll leave this then." He was gone before anything else could be said. The quiet that followed was dense. Norah looked at the coffee. Then at Vincent. "That wasn't necessary," she said. "He needs to understand the arrangement. You embarrassed him. He'll recover. He was being kind to me." Vincent set his pen down, came around the desk with the measured patience of a man who never moved without deciding to first. Not close enough to touch, close enough to make the room feel smaller. "He wants something from you," he said. "And what do you want?" The question sat between them, larger than it had seemed when she asked it. He looked at her for a long moment. "Everything." The word arrived so quietly it took a second to land. When it did, the room seemed to reorganize itself around it. His phone buzzed. He answered without looking away from her. "Yes." A pause. "Send it through." He put it down. The ordinary rhythm of the office resumed around the edges of something that was not ordinary at all. They ate lunch in the office. No one asked where Norah wanted hers. Vincent simply told the catering service when they arrived with the trolley, "Both in here." She did not argue in front of someone else. They ate at the small round table near the windows, him with a mineral water and a file he closed before sitting, her with a soup that went mostly cold. Below them, Montreal moved in its January way, the river showing under thin gray cloud, a cargo ship pushing slow through the water, tourists who had no idea they were there. For a while, neither of them spoke. She had spent 11 months imagining what it would be like to have his full attention in a room without an agenda in the way. In the imagination, it had been more graceful than this. In reality, it felt like trying to breathe near something very large and very still. She set down her spoon. How many of them do you think have already invented a version of this afternoon? All of them. And that doesn't concern you. He lifted his water glass. I spent 11 months walking past your desk. Norah went still. He set the glass down. That was my error. I don't intend to manage this one the same way. The room sharpened around the sentence. You don't know what this is, she said quietly. No. He looked at her across the table. Then why is it that when someone else makes you laugh, I want him on a different floor? Her breath caught. He leaned back in his chair but kept his eyes on her. You asked yesterday why it mattered. She said nothing. Now you know. Her hand tightened around the stem of her water glass. That's not fair. No. Something moved in his expression, and for the first time she saw the full cost of 11 months of deliberate distance. Because I have been trying not to feel things about you for a very long time. The silence after that was complete. The city kept moving beyond the glass. Her own pulse was too loud. Then she said it. Quietly, without planning to. So have I. He went perfectly still. She could not believe she had said it once. She looked down at the white tablecloth, at her own hand resting too tightly against the edge of the table. When she looked up, he was already standing. He crossed the space between them with the unhurried certainty of a man who had decided the outcome before he moved. He stopped close enough that the air between them was no longer neutral. How long, he said. Since February. She swallowed. The engineer in the hall. Something passed through his face, recognition, and then something rawer than that. His hand rose and settled against her jaw with a care that bore no resemblance to his public self. His thumb moved once against her cheekbone. I owe you an apology, he said. Her pulse was doing unreasonable things. For what? For not seeing you sooner. He kissed her. No preamble, no tentative beginning, deep and immediate, and carrying the particular weight of something that has been held in check, long past the point where restraint makes sense. Norah's hand rose on its own and found the front of his shirt, fingers curling into the fabric because everything else in the room had become unreliable. She forgot the floor, the glass walls, the junior associates outside who were probably not looking, definitely looking. There was only the press of his hand at the back of her neck and the reality of finally being touched by the man she had wanted through 11 months of careful professional distance. When he pulled back, both of them needed a moment. His forehead settled near hers briefly before he stepped away. Norah stood with her hand still uncertain and her pulse completely rearranged. This can't happen here, she said, barely above a whisper. It already did. She pressed her fingertips against her lower lip. The whole office will know. They already suspect. Vincent, he looked at her. Why now? No hesitation. Because this morning, another man remembered how you take your coffee and I realized I was already a year too late to lie to myself. The words hit somewhere she was not prepared for. A knock at the glass wall. Vincent stepped back and had entirely composed himself by the time he said, "Come in." Norah turned toward the window and tried to recover her face. Garrett entered, stopped, managed to make his gaze land somewhere professionally neutral. "Problem on the Laval site," he said, "and there's a man downstairs who's been asking at reception." Asking what? Garrett's tone shifted by a fraction. Asking about the floor plan of the fort, specifically about workstation assignments. A pause. And about whether any of the staff lived alone. The room changed. Vincent's face did not move. That made it worse. What company did he give? One that doesn't exist. The name cleared, but the registered address is a vacant lot in Longueuil. Security ran the image. Nothing came back clean. Norah's fingers tightened on the window frame. That could be anything. Both men looked at her. She heard herself and hated the sound of it. Too thin, too hopeful. Reaching for an explanation that would let her walk home tonight the same way she had walked to work this morning. Vincent spoke first. No. One word. His voice hadn't changed at all. That was the part that frightened her. He crossed to his desk and pressed the intercom. Close the privacy partition. No calls unless it's Garrett or the Laval contractor. The smoked glass slid across the outer wall. The office became its own sealed room, suspended above the river. He turned back to her. Someone noticed. Noticed what? That you matter to me. He said it without inflection, the way he stated site dimensions and delivery timelines, which made it strike harder, not softer. In my world, that is more than sufficient information for certain people to find interesting. Norah searched his face for exaggeration. Found none. Garrett reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a white envelope. Thin. No marking. He set it on the desk without being asked. Vincent opened it. He read what was inside in the time it took her to cross the room to stand beside him. The photograph was of her, taken from the street outside her building on Rue Boyer the previous evening. Blue coat, hair loose, key in her hand at the front door. Taken from close enough to read her expression, the cold moved through her all at once. There was a note, Garrett said. Vincent folded the photograph with a single deliberate crease and set it down. What did it say? Garrett's voice stayed flat, professional. Careful men have pretty offices. The sentence sat there in the warmer air of the office and did something to the temperature that had nothing to do with the building's heating system. That's all? Norah heard her own voice ask. Vincent looked at her. In his face she could see the shape of what he already understood. Not office gossip. Not someone curious about a staffing change. Something older. Something that had been watching her for longer than this morning. Who are they? She said. He glanced at Garrett. Give us a moment. Garrett left without sound. Vincent set both hands flat on the desk. There's a group. Old connections, old money, old methods. They've learned that direct pressure on my operations is expensive, so they look for other approaches. Through people. Yes. She looked at the folded photograph. And now that's me. A muscle moved in his jaw. Yes. The office went very quiet. Norah turned toward the window. The river was flat and gray below, the city moving around it without any knowledge of this room or this conversation. She should have felt afraid. She did feel afraid, but underneath it was something else. A thin, cold thread of understanding. This was why the distance had existed. Why a man like Vincent Rohr kept careful space between himself and anything he valued. Because the world he moved through did not allow for anything so plain as simply caring about someone. When did you know, she said, that I could be used this way? His pause was very brief. The moment I heard you laugh this morning. She turned back. He was watching her the way he had in February, in the hallway, before he knew she was there, as though he was used to observing things privately. I kept the distance for a reason, he said. I should have held it. The words bruised. You kissed me. Yes. You moved my desk. Yes. You said you were done pretending. He exhaled once, sharp. I was. Then which is it? His eyes darkened. Don't confuse regret with doubt. The sentence had enough force that she went still. He came toward her, his hand lifted to her jaw again. Not possessive this time. Steady, something anchoring in it. I want you where I can keep you safe, he said quietly. Norah looked at him for a long moment. What happens now? You don't go home tonight. She pulled back. Vincent, your building has 3 entry points I can't control and a street-level entrance with no camera coverage. That photograph was taken last evening. I don't know how long they've been watching. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to sleep somewhere I can manage. At your place. Yes. The words settled into the air between them. She thought of the photo, her own face at her own door, photographed from across a dark street. She thought of the cold note, the language of it, not threatening, which somehow made it worse. Measuring, establishing a point of leverage. All right, she said finally. Something released in him. They left the building through a side entrance Norah had not known existed. A black vehicle was waiting. Garrett held the door. Vincent got in beside her and they moved through the city as evening came down over the river, the streetlights coming on one sector at a time, the old buildings of the plateau giving way to the broader streets of Outremont. She watched Montreal pass through tinted glass and tried to recognize herself in the situation she was sitting inside of. They know where I live, she said. Yes, and you think bringing me to your house makes this better? I think it gives me the ability to respond to it, which is different. She looked at his profile against the window. You're very calm. One of us should be. That almost made her laugh. She didn't, but it almost did. The house was on a quiet street in Westmount, behind old stone and mature trees stripped bare in January. Nothing announced itself, no brass nameplate. The kind of house that had never needed to. Inside high ceilings, dark wood, art that was serious and good. A library through a half-open door. A kitchen that suggested Lena, the household manager. A composed woman in her 50s who appeared from a side hallway and greeted Vincent with the particular efficiency of someone who had long since stopped registering unusual circumstances, ran it with exactly as much care as the rest of the house. Miss Bennett will need a room, Vincent said. Lena did not blink. Of course. Does she have preferences? Norah started to answer. Vincent said, the room adjacent to mine. Lena nodded once, left. Norah looked at him. You didn't have to say that in front of her. Yes, he said. I did. The evening passed slowly and fast at the same time. Norah ate something she could barely taste while Vincent took calls she could partially hear from across the kitchen. More French, more of that colder register, names she didn't recognize, streets she did. Garrett came and went twice. The second time he stayed longer, voice low. Later, when the house had settled into something approaching quiet, she found Vincent in the library with a folder open on the desk and his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the forearm. He looked less assembled than she had ever seen him. Not diminished. The opposite. He glanced up. "You should sleep. So should you." She crossed to the armchair across from his. "What did they find?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he closed the folder. The envelope came through a courier service. Cash. The courier's description matches someone connected to a group called the Brigard Network. Old school, built on contract work and strategic pressure. They don't take direct action if there's a subtler option. He paused. Subtler options tend to mean people. Norah folded her hands in her lap. "People like me, people close to me." His voice was careful. "You weren't meant to become that, not this fast. But I did." A silence. "Yes." She looked at the dark window. The garden beyond was invisible in the January dark. "Is this going to get worse? Before it gets better?" She nodded slowly. The honesty of it was almost a comfort. "What do you do?" "I make it clear that this particular avenue is not worth the cost they'll pay for using it." She looked back at him. "And how do you do that?" He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Tomorrow I have some conversations. Tonight I'd like to know you're upstairs." She stood, crossed to his desk and stood on the other side of it with her arms loosely folded, not defensive, just holding herself steady in the gravity of what had become an unreasonable day. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "Just so we're clear." Something changed in his face. "I know. I'm afraid of the photograph, of whoever took it and why. That's the correct thing to be afraid of." "I'm also afraid," she said more quietly, "of how fast this moved." He looked at her across the desk. The library was warm, the old books along the wall absorbing the lamplight, the house sitting solid and quiet around them. "So am I," he said. She had not expected that. He came around the desk and stopped in front of her, and this time when his hand settled against her face it was the slowest thing he had done all day. His thumb at the corner of her cheekbone, his eyes finding hers. "I'm sorry it took me this long," he said. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. He kissed her again, and this time it was nothing like the office. It was quieter, slower, carrying the weight of the evening and the cold and the photo, and the strange, stubborn fact of being wanted by a man who had spent almost a year learning her without knowing he was doing it. She pressed into it until the room and the danger, and the long, uncertain day, finally briefly receded. 3 days later, Vincent brought her into a room she had no name for and introduced her to men she would never see in any public context. The room was in a building west of the Lachine Canal. Windowless, wood-paneled, the kind of space that existed to hold conversations that left no formal record. The men who stood when Vincent entered wore suits of varying quality and expressions of near-identical assessment. Some she recognized from city infrastructure meetings. Some she did not recognize at all, which was its own kind of information. Vincent walked in with Norah beside him, not behind him. The room understood the distinction immediately. An older man with silver temples and the careful stillness of someone who had survived 30 years in rooms like this one, looked from Vincent to Norah and back again. "So the photograph was real?" "Yes," Vincent said, "and she knows what she's standing in." Norah met the man's gaze before Vincent could answer for her. Enough of it. A small recalibration moved through the room, respect reshaping where there had been assessment. Vincent placed one hand at the small of her back. "Her name is Norah Bennett. She's under my protection and under my name in every regard that matters. If anyone in this room or connected to this room or doing business that touches this room makes a move against her, directly, indirectly, or through association, it is not a move against a woman, it is a move against me." The room held. "And a move against me," he said quietly, "becomes a problem for every arrangement, every site, every agreement connected to this table." Garrett opened a folder at the center of the table. Photographs, a property record, a vehicle registration, 2 phone records. The Brigard Network, set out in clear, cold documentation. No one in the room spoke. The older man with the silver temples lifted a glass and said, almost to himself, "To the woman who made Roar stop managing from a distance." Something dark and dry moved across Vincent's expression. Careful, quiet laughter. The kind that belonged to rooms like this one. The meeting was over in 20 minutes. In the elevator down, Norah exhaled for the first time since they'd walked in. "You just told that entire room I'm yours," she said. He looked at her. "Does that bother you?" She considered the question honestly. Through the weeks that followed, the answer proved to be no, which surprised her in the way that things surprising you about yourself always do. The photography stopped. The Brigard Network encountered certain complications that Garrett never explained to her in detail. Jonah Luke sent a message to her personal phone 10 days after the meeting. Heard you're official. Take care of yourself, Norah, she wrote back. Thank you for the coffee. It mattered more than you know. He never replied, and she understood that too. She returned to the 14th floor through the same building entrance she had always used, on a Thursday in late January, with snow still coming off the river in sheets. Her desk, her interior desk, had not moved. No one sends anything directly. The junior associates adjusted. The senior partners asked her questions through proper channels and received proper answers. Two people who had been audibly speculative about the arrangement found reasons to relocate their gossip to other floors. She worked. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. The difference was that now when she looked up from the drawings, he was there. And when she was there, he knew it. The glances were not hidden. The coffee arrived from somewhere better than the cafe downstairs and appeared on her desk without negotiation. In meetings, he sometimes looked to her before he answered a client question, not for approval. He had never needed that from anyone, but in the way of a man who has admitted something to himself and finds that admission has changed the way he moves through a room. In February, on a Tuesday evening when the office had mostly emptied, he came and stood beside her desk and looked at the revised elevations she was reviewing. The eastern shadow line is wrong, he said. I know, I'm fixing it. He stayed. She looked up after a moment. He was watching her the way she had watched him, she realized, for months carefully from the margins of his attention, learning the shape of something he had been trying not to want. What? She said. Nothing. You're staring. I know. She turned back to the drawing. You should go home. We have the same home. That was new. She had moved in properly 2 weeks ago, the Rosemont apartment handed back to its landlord, her things in the Westmount house by the end of a Saturday. She was still adjusting to the size of the rooms and the fact that the radiator worked without being asked. Semantics, she said. He came around to her side of the desk and sat on the edge of it, unhurried, deliberate, taking up exactly as much space as he wanted, and reached out to adjust the drafting light so it fell better on the paper. You're the first thing I actually looked at, he said, once I stopped deciding not to. Norah kept her eyes on the elevation, her pencil stilled on the page. That took you 11 months, she said. It took someone else's coffee and your laugh carrying down a corridor. She finally turned and looked at him. In the low office light, with his jacket off and his sleeves pushed up, and Montreal pressing its cold gray self against the windows. Behind him he looked like the man she had fallen in love with in a February hallway, and also like someone she was still learning, which was a different thing and maybe a better one. Jonas Coffey, she said. His greatest contribution to my life, Vincent said, and he'll never know it. She laughed, the real kind, unguarded, filling the quiet of the empty floor. He watched her do it with an expression she was only beginning to know how to read, something between possession and wonder, as though he was still adjusting to the fact of being allowed to see it up close. He reached for her hand and held it without making anything of it. The city outside kept its pace. The river kept moving. Somewhere in the building the cleaning crew started their rounds on the lower floors, and in the quiet of the 14th the most careful man in the room sat beside the woman he had spent a year not letting himself see, and finally, simply, stayed.